Alright, I'm going to do something different here. I've been wanting to branch out my reviews for a long time, and I really wanted to make my Chicago homies Local H my first targets, but I'm totally not confident in my ability to create reasonably length reviews. So you know what? Let's just do a ranking. You guys like watching rankings, don't you? I'm not even going to do FaceTime on this one. I'm just going to stream of conscious this and edit it into something coherent. And the real reason is I had a little bit of a mishap with my facial hair, so yeah. I'm going to let it grow back a little bit. And who knows, maybe something cool will happen, like Scott Lucas himself will see this video and he'll think, man, I enjoyed watching that, even if he did occasionally make my piss boil. I'd be willing to do this guy a solid and make him an original piece of music that he can freely use as an intro to his videos without getting copyright claimed. Which, hypothetically speaking, wouldn't have to be long, just 30 seconds. It could be longer, but I only need 30 seconds. And hopefully some guitar slashes that I can sync my start and finish to. Lyrics are optional, but something in the vein of Fritz's Corner. You know, just hypothetically. Hey, a guy can dream. So without further ado, number 9. Okay, coming in last, I'll just go ahead and say Lifers. Now, it is the most recent album, so you should keep that in mind. It's from 2020. Because some good things did come out of that year, so I definitely have not listened to this album anywhere near as much as the others. And in my experience, Local H is a band that really grows on you. Usually when I listen to a new Local H album, I don't immediately love it. I honestly really didn't like Ham-Fisted on my first listen. I didn't think anything special of As Good as Dead either, even though ironically it was one of the first albums I ever bought myself. I remember being initially disappointed with Whatever Happened to PJ Souls, which was the second Local H album I got. But it's already 4 years later, so I think I probably should be just a little bit further along on that. I think the lack of progress is a little bit telling. Now, a good reason of that might have to do with the fact that out of all of their albums, this one sounds the most like its predecessor. As Good as Dead sounded different than Ham-Fisted, Pack Up the Cat sounded different than As Good as Dead, Here Comes the Zoo sounded completely different than Pack Up the Cats, Whatever Happened to PJ Souls sounded completely different to Here Comes the Zoo. Now, admittedly, after this, their sound didn't change too radically from 12 Angry Months to Hallelujah, I'm a Bum, but I still thought it sounded different enough. Now, Hey Killer sounded radically different, which is due in no small part to the fact that they had a new drummer, but in my opinion, Lifers sounds just like Hey Killer. And I loved Hey Killer, don't get me wrong. But I'm a little disappointed. Unlike most of their other albums, I don't think this one has a concept. Not that I really care about that. Honestly, I'd probably prefer not having a concept. As for Sticks Picks, I'm not even sure what my top 3 songs would even be. Well, I suppose I'll just give the songs a quick rating. I'm not going to go in depth on each individual song. If I actually had enough to talk about on each album, I would have just simply made reviews in the first place. I like to use a 4-star rating. Maybe throw in some pluses and minuses for wiggle room if I think it's a bit of a floater. 4 stars means I never skip this song. 3 stars means I will never skip this song unless I really want to listen to a 4-star song instead. 2 stars means I may or may not skip depending on my mood. And then 1-star songs I don't particularly care for. I probably will skip them. Normally I'd use the 5-star rating, but I don't think there's any F-tier Local H songs. There's certainly some great songs on here. Patrick Bateman, quintessential Local H. Maybe Beyond the Valley of Snakes. I do also like Sunday Best, on the softer side of the spectrum. But I don't really know about the rest of the songs. They're good, but I wouldn't necessarily say they're great. I'd give them 3 stars at least. I don't know how many of them I'd give 4 stars. Maybe less than any other album. I don't really want to think too hard on it because my mind's not really made up on this album yet. Laid to rest in my Sunday best, I was late. Number 8. 12 Angry Months. This was their 6th album, released in 2008. I know a lot of people like this, but I think it really comes down to one divisive fact, which is the fact that this is a tight concept album. It's the story of a breakup, or at the very least a failing relationship. From what other fans have told me, if you've been through a breakup, yeah, this album is probably going to hit you a lot harder. Me personally, it doesn't really do much for me. And okay, I will admit that I'm a little biased against concept albums. While the idea is neat, the problem with a concept album is, if you don't really care for the concept, then you're not going to enjoy the music as much. And the premise is definitely going to wear thin. As you might expect, being in the rock sphere, Scott Lucas has written a number of songs about relationships before, so I certainly didn't need to listen to a full album of it. I wouldn't be so bothered if this was just an EP of like 5 or 6 Angry Months. But that being said, most of these songs are the best that he's ever written on the subject. Scott Lucas's sense of humor and writing give them a lot of bite. I mean, one of the songs is named, "Jesus Christ, did you see the size of that sperm whale?" It's ironic because this might actually have been the album that grew on me the fastest. The first time I listened to this album, I immediately loved most of these songs. But it's just the fact that it's all about the same topic that doesn't really interest me is what really drags this down. I just wish I was more interested in what he was singing about. As for Sticks Picks, once again, I'm not really sure what my top 3 would be. The one with Kid, definitely. BMW Man, pretty good choice. White Belt Boys, likewise. Machine Shed Wrestling. It really comes down to me trying to choose between beats and guitar riffs. Don't really have much to say on specific songs because, of course, they're all about the same general thing, even if it does explore a few different avenues, like fighting over possessions, dealing with the fallout among friends, meeting the new boyfriend, along with presumably hooking up with a girl on the rebound, which also goes to shit. Unless our protagonist is trying to get back with the girl, I'm honestly not sure. Out of all their albums, this is one that I never listen to on a whim. I'll listen to it if I'm going through the entire discography, because oh yeah, I sometimes have local H marathons. Number 7. Here Comes the Zoo. This was their 4th album, released in 2002, originally scheduled for September 2001, but delayed because of reasons that you probably know. It's a radical departure from their normal sound. Local H is overall a rock band, specifically alternative rock, but they've got the soul of grunge, which was far more on display in the 90s. As time went on, they became far more rock-oriented. This album is by far the most rock they've ever gone. This album has a very old-school rock sound to it. Now, perhaps part of this could be chalked up to the new drummer Brian St. Clair. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the sound that they've got here, and they've absolutely nailed what they set out to do. They set out to make an album that sounded like it could have been made in the 70s. Aside from the old rock and roll style, Here Comes the Zoo doesn't have an actual concept, covers all the bullet points of rock and roll, fame, sex, drugs. Sure, it ain't always pretty, but it's a living. And now for Sticks Picks. Coming up with the top 3 on this album is pretty tricky because you've got a bunch of typical radio-friendly, shorter hits, and then you got a couple epic tracks. Got Son of Cha, Fifth Avenue Crazy, Bryn Mawr Stomp. I don't know if that's pronounced correctly. Then you got Rock and Roll Professionals, which I'm definitely putting that one on the list. Baby Wants to Tame Me, What Would You Have Me Do, of which the former track is almost 10 minutes, and the second track is fucking 25. I'd probably just go ahead and say What Would You Have Me Do, for the sheer self-indulgent, depressive wallowing for 25 fucking minutes. Even though it's not really that long, the last 10 minutes are really just one big joke. Honestly, I could have done without that. I don't want to hate on him for making a specialty album, but that's just the thing. It doesn't have enough of the H flavor in it. While Scott Lucas does still bring his humor and style to this, it is very downplayed. It's really just limited to Rock and Roll Professionals and Keep Your Girlfriend, both of which are parodies of sorts, with the former being more straightforward and the latter being more ironic. but outside of them, the rest of the songs are pretty straight-faced. I do have to question if it was even conceived for a good reason. The band was already on the outs with the label at the time because the company was undergoing a merger, and pretty much anyone who actually knew who Local H was lost their job. So the way Scott Lucas tells it, this was some kamikaze rocking the boat. He didn't really care if they got dropped. And well, they got dropped, so mission accomplished there too, I guess. And it was also a bit limiting. They specifically went for only 10 tracks just because Back in Black had only 10 tracks. All the previous albums had at least 12. They made a lot of tracks during this time. Some of them were really good, but they didn't appear on the album simply because it would have been over 10 tracks. It's a real double-edged sword. I don't really want to hear Local H pretend to be some band from the 70s. I want Local H to sound like Local H. But despite all that, I'm more likely to listen to this than 12 Angry Months. Number 6, Ham-Fisted. Okay, the next one is a little bit of a floater. I don't know if I want to put it here or give it the edge over the next one. From a purely objective standpoint, it's easy to say that this is their worst album, as it is their first. Obviously, they did not have anywhere near the level of experience or skill that they would have on later albums. But on the other hand, this album absolutely oozes personality. This wasn't the first Local H album I listened to. As Good as Dead was first. Whatever Happened to PJ Souls was second. Here Comes the Zoo was third. There was the No Fun EP, but I'm not going to count that in this discussion. I don't remember if I listened to this before Pack Up the Cats. Honestly, I have to say it seems fitting to put this one right alongside Here Comes the Zoo. They both sit at different sides of the extreme in the Local H catalog, especially for the times they were made. Basically, Local H albums are rock with grunge mixed in. Here Comes the Zoo was straight up rock, whereas this album is straight up grunge, which unfortunately did not really work in their favor at the time. They were labeled as Nirvana Bees, which is really disingenuous. Local H wasn't aping Nirvana. Local H was grunge before grunge was popular. Nirvana didn't invent grunge. They weren't even the first major grunge band. They were just simply by far the most successful, and that's where Local H actually was able to rise up, because that's how it works in the music industry. Once Nirvana hit it big, all the record labels became interested in other bands that could have been the next Nirvana. So if you sounded like Nirvana, suddenly you were in demand. Simply put, this album came out at the wrong fucking time. 1995 to be specific. By that time, Kurt Cobain was dead and buried, and grunge pretty much collapsed immediately afterwards. It was a tough break. People were definitely not looking for a replacement. But anyway, you've got all the bass, down-tuned guitars, feedback and distortion, brooding lyrics, and the lyrics are absolutely dripping with teenage angst. While it is not a concept album per se, it is very much an album about being a teenager or a 20-something or 20-nothing. And yep, it covers the expected topics: alienation, underage drinking, self-loathing, working a dead-end job. Now sure, it may not be as deep and meaningful as it seems, but even as early as the first album, Scott Lucas already had his sense of humor that broke up at least a little bit of the angst, as best seen on Mayonnaise and Malaise, which he specifically wrote about his time working at Subway, but it also works for any other job. But there are still parts on the album that are more cringe. Bag of Hammers is probably the worst song lyrically to ever make it onto a Local H album. They've got a couple of B-sides that are in the running for worst track ever, but we're talking strictly the albums here. I like that guitar riff though. Alright, as for Sticks Picks, I'd have to say that my top 3 is a sweep. Cynic, Mayonnaise and Malaise, User. The first 2 of which were actually singles, and pretty dead on in my opinion. I'd probably say those were the 2 best songs, which might actually be why Local H never really took off. For a lot of Local H albums, I just don't think the record labels chose the right songs to promote. Okay, yeah, let's go back. Here Comes the Zoo, Hands on the Bible, Half-Life. Those are probably my two least favorite songs from the album. Hands on the Bible, I can see some appeal. I did actually hear this on the radio once. Pretty certain it wasn't Q101. Was it 94.7? Why wasn't Rock and Roll Professionals a single? 12 Angry Months had 24-hour breakup session. Again, I would say that might have actually been the worst song on the album. I actually did hear 24-hour breakup session on the radio back when the album first dropped, but just once. Machine Shed Wrestling was the other single. I swear I heard it on the radio once. Lifers, Patrick Bateman. That was great. I don't know what's going on with the rest of the songs. I guess they're unofficial singles. I mean, they're not on a major label anymore. Alright, to have a little bit more fun, I don't like to put singles on my top list because that's not very original. So if we take those out of the equation, I'd probably say Manipulator and Sports Bar. I'm nostalgic for that grunge. Even if he does rhyme, I feel sad with used to have. Come on, man. I once had. That would have worked. Technically speaking, it is their least skilled album. So yeah, your mileage will definitely vary on this album, but I was the right age when I first listened to it. Yep, I was 20-nothing when I heard this album. It sure was something. So this album definitely has that nostalgia kick to it. So I might actually put it ahead of the next entry. Number 5. Hallelujah, I'm a Bum. Released in 2012, this was the final release to have Brian St. Clair. This was the 7th album by Local H, but I can't say it's the luckiest. One of their albums had a cat motif. Guess it's only fair the dogs get one too. And speaking of Pack Up the Cats, this one actually has some of the same style, where many of the songs actually flow seamlessly from one track to the next. But for this album, the exceptions are not egregious like they were in Pack Up the Cats. Scott Lucas decided he was going to have a more, quote, political flavor in his songs. That was definitely worrying to me, but fortunately my fears were unfounded, because the album really isn't all that political. It's more of a loose concept album rather than a tight one. It's really more in the background. It's not in your face. There's definitely no activism going on here. There's no preaching. Scott Lucas doesn't pretend to have solutions. It is just simply a lamentation of the state of affairs. So in that regards, it's almost like a grown-up version of As Good as Dead. While he does explicitly name drop a few things or people, the overall subject matter is a lot more vague. You don't really get any red versus blue unless I just missed it. It's definitely a far cry from the Drum EP. I'm sure his politics have become more sophisticated since then. It's really more economic than political. He does badmouth Fox News, but by and large the subject matter of the songs is more along the lines of, man, I ain't got no fucking money. Wonder what Scott thinks of Joe Biden. Alright, let me pull out some examples here. Apparently Night Flight to Paris is about two brothers who sit on opposite ends of the political spectrum. I don't know if the song is supposed to be literal and one is actually leaving the country, or if it's metaphorical and they're being driven apart. Magic of songs, I guess. And for some of the other songs, the politics are so vague that I honestly don't even know what the song is even about. Case in point, Sad History, which seems to be a song about a relationship. Yeah, haven't heard that one in the Local H catalog before. I do not see where the politics come in on this song. I have no idea what Scott Lucas meant when he wrote Blue Line, but it definitely makes me feel a certain way when I listen to it driving to work, and I do get the impression Scott Lucas probably was thinking along a similar line. While I do appreciate the vagueness because the concept doesn't come up unless you're looking for it, I question if that's really a good thing. I don't think Another February needed a political angle to it. It starts off sounding like a quintessential Local H song. It's got the basic H sense of humor, complaining about how much winter sucks in Chicago, shoveling snow, can't get the car started, but then it suddenly turns dark and now it's about going to the bar and getting hammered, not being able to pay bills. It honestly feels a little bit out of place. Makes me wonder if it was a completely different song and then they just simply shoehorned some economic reference to make it fit the theme of the album. I mean, yeah, that's really the big hang-up for this album to me. But still, it's a concept album that is loose and vague, so you can still listen to the songs and come away with your own interpretations. And even if you take the politics out, you're still going to be technically half right. And this just might be their most varied album overall. Did a fair amount of experimentation. You've got violins, saxophone, and horns. Maybe some other stuff too. Hell, the song Look Who's Walking on Two Legs Again is actually performed with the members of his other band, Scott Lucas and the Married Men. Too bad the Prairie Cartel couldn't appear. I don't think they're even a thing anymore. Too bad we couldn't have gotten their album on CD. And on a purely trivial note, not that I'm counting this against them, I think it's their second least profane album. Local H was never an especially profane band, but pretty much every album has 4 or 5 songs with profanity. Alright, Sticks Picks. Patty Considine is another one of those quintessential Local H songs. I think I'd go with Waves again. I don't know what I'd put in the third slot. Night Flight to Paris, Blue Line, Here Come Old Laptop. I guess if I had to sum it up, I'd classify it as a misfire that still hit the outer fringe of the bullseye. I can definitely say the album works a lot better when the concepts are abstract. Sadly enough at this point, Local H was completely out of the public eye. They didn't release any singles for this album, unless we're counting the Another February EP. And this is actually the last album that was even sold in stores. Everything else had to be bought directly from G&P Records, which is a plug if you're looking for them. Number 4. Alright, we're coming up on the best of the best now. I know this is gonna ruffle some fur. Pack Up the Cats, their third album from 1998. This album was the last to feature the original drummer Joe Daniels. I know a lot of people consider this the best, and I can see why. In some ways, like overall consistency, this is their best album. Especially if you're talking about consistent rocking. Now, as far as variety goes, this is one of their more homogeneous albums, with the exception of the interlude tracks. None of these songs are really soft. They're all pretty hard rockers. It isn't the most homogeneous album. It's definitely more varied than Here Comes the Zoo. It's definitely the bridge between As Good as Dead and Here Comes the Zoo. It is largely rock. You've got a little bit of that lingering grunge, but it is ultimately rock at heart. I guess this is what you might call post-grunge. Of course, some people said the previous albums were already post-grunge, but no one agreed on what grunge was in the first place, so how the fuck does anyone know what post-grunge is? This album definitely has more of that H flavor, and you need look no further than the track Lucky. Pack Up the Cats probably had the tightest concept thus far in their career, and the concept this time is apparently the story of a band that strikes it big, but perhaps isn't cut out for it, and the struggles resulting. Now, I said apparently because, like Hallelujah, the concept is a bit loose and vague, and that is to the album's benefit because, to be honest, I had no idea this was even a concept album until someone told me. And now that I do know it's a concept album, I can see where it comes in. Some of these tracks clearly relate to being a rock star, but there's also plenty of more universal subjects. Being popular or not, partying recklessly, being depressed and self-medicating with alcohol, working a job that your girlfriend doesn't like, apparently an argument over having a cat, I think. I don't know, maybe it was a metaphor for what kind of a man she wanted, with a lyric like, I don't want to be a rat and you don't want a kitty cat. I almost wondered if it was like, well, I'm sorry I'm too much of a nice guy for you. But honestly, the song doesn't make any fucking sense anyway. I mean, honestly, the lyrics made as much sense as what I thought they were originally saying. Well, it certainly wasn't the most egregious mishearing of lyrics I've ever had. And perhaps owing to the whole concept, a number of songs on this album seamlessly transition one to another. Although certainly not all of them. Laminate Man ends with what would seem to be a segue to Cool Magnet, but it instead goes into All the Kids Are Right. Maybe they decided to start Cool Magnet off a different way so it didn't work anymore. While I do not know for certain if the songs were meant to segue from one another, or if it was just simply an outro, it is nonetheless very jarring. As for the singles, there were two of them. There was Alright, Oh Yeah, and I gotta ask, what the hell is going on with this title? I have never seen Alright with a dash in the middle. The only possible exception I could think of is if it was a noun, like the company gave the all right to proceed on this. And why is there a comma between oh and yeah? Considering the energy behind the song, I'm pretty certain it's oh yeah, and not oh yeah. And alright, I can see it, no pun intended. I don't consider it an H classic, but it's a very energetic song and you can use it anywhere. It's got mainstream appeal, so yeah, I'll give this one the thumbs up. The other one was All the Kids Are Right, which, by the way, I have heard the song on the radio at least once, maybe twice. I don't know. Personally, I'm a little meh on this song. It's not a bad song, but I certainly think there were better ones. And with that, let's go to Sticks Picks. Number 1, She Hates My Job. Probably my favorite song off the album. I don't know why this wasn't the single. I would say Deep Cut and Hit the Skids, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love to Rock. Yeah, I'm the kind of guy who uses full titles, grading each song individually. I would have to say that this is their most consistent album. I don't think I'd give anything less than a 3, with the only possible exceptions being the short interlude tracks. Sure, they're not really 3-star songs, but because they're so short, there's really no point in skipping them. If I were listening to this album, I probably wouldn't skip any songs. I'd listen to it start to finish. But on the other hand, I don't think this album has that many 4-star songs. If I were to make a custom Local H album of all my favorite songs, I don't know how many of them from this album would make the cut. Local H just simply has that many good songs to work with. Really, my biggest knock against the album might just be the concept. It's just kind of cliche. And yeah, you could actually say this is their most conservative album, the most mainstream, and definitely the least profane. There's only one swear on the whole album, which might certainly go a long way towards explaining why it's such a popular album to choose. Local H is a unique band, but this is not an especially unique album. I don't think there's a shortage of bands that could have made an album like this. Paradoxically, I feel that Pack Up the Cats has higher lows than all the other albums, but at the same time, doesn't hit the same highs as often. You can round it however you want, but comes out lower on my end. Number 3. Hey Killer, taking the Bronze as their 8th album, released in 2015. This was the first album to feature their current drummer, Ryan Harding. I gotta say, after the previous 2 albums, I thought this was a welcome return to form, of sorts. Not that the previous 2 albums really abandon it, but I just feel like this album had way more magic. Well, hey, you can't hit grand slams all the time. Now, if you remember, the 2 albums in question didn't really change up their sound after whatever happened to PJ Souls, but this album does, probably because it has a brand new drummer. Strangely enough, I would say that this album has that classic rock vibe that Here Comes the Zoo was going after, albeit more for some songs than others. But despite that, it sounds completely different than Here Comes the Zoo. A number of songs also have the more classic H sound, or themes. I would call this a classic rock throwback sound that still has all the essence of Local H. I'm not a music expert, so I can't tell you what exactly it is, but I would say it's got more of a modern raw sound. Sometimes the rock sounds classic, sometimes it sounds raw, but it always sounds awesome. This is what Here Comes the Zoo should have sounded like. And on that note, this album is also predominantly hard rocking. There's only one track that's really soft. One of Us is a bit of a hybrid. Yeah, you know what? Thinking on it, I would say this beats Pack Up the Cats for their most consistently awesome album. Not the most consistently rocking album, but Well, I guess if you included the interludes, this would totally beat Pack Up the Cats on that front too. Overall, it has a greater dynamic range. Pack Up the Cats didn't have any full-length, soft songs. Hey Killer is, properly speaking, not a concept album, but according to Scott Lucas, there are 3 recurring themes that pop up at least once in every song. Death, religion, and blues. I'm not sure if I really see it, but whatever. Man, I just don't have a lot to say about this album except I really fucking like it. And I'm even debating whether or not this should be in second place, but I don't think I would go quite that far. I would say that my one complaint is the pacing. While it's a great album from start to finish, in my humble opinion, this is a very front-loaded album. Pretty much all of the best songs went first. And while the second half is by no means weak, it is a little anticlimactic in the wake of the first half. This was actually one of the albums that had to grow on me a little bit. I used to think that the entire second half of this album was a huge letdown. Sticks picks, goddamn. I know this has kind of been a running theme, but these songs are so fucking good, I'm not sure what I'd choose. I'd probably have to put The Last Picture Showing Zion on there. It's a quintessential Local H song and a nice throwback. It's a song about the destruction of Zion's only movie theater. This is definitely a song that only Local H would make. And honestly, this song might be responsible for some of my initial disappointments on the album, because it made me think that the album was going to be something that it wasn't. Like I said, the first half of this album is just fire. City of Knives, Freshly Fucked. That's pretty quintessential in itself. Gig Bag Road. You got the Misanthrope, which has me wondering what exactly the song is about. Now, I don't want to misspeak on Scott Lucas's behalf, but I'll just say that it sounds like something that Bad Religion might have wrote. Now, that is some fire I would have loved to see on Hallelujah. One of Us. And now we're technically already past the halfway point, because it was 11 songs, so it doesn't divide evenly anyway. But yeah, still, Leon in the Game of Skin, it's one of their epic rockers. I'm not too big on Mansplainer. I like Age Group Champion, but it's not in the same league as a lot of the earlier songs. Then you got John the Baptist Blues. I think I might actually put that on my third place. Definitely the best song on the second half of the album. And then that just leaves I Am a Salt Mine. It's one of their soft closers that they've ended a lot of albums on. Not all of them, but certainly several. Sadly, like the previous album, there were no singles. And unless I'm mistaken, you couldn't even buy this thing in stores. This was the first album that you had to buy directly from the source. And you know what? I am really coming around to just declaring this a tie with I'm the Age Group Champion. Number 2. Whatever Happened to PJ Souls? Their 5th album, released in 2004. This has historically been my second favorite album, and it might have even been my favorite for a while. I don't really know because I never really wanted to think about what my favorite album would be, but one day I was going for a long trip and I decided to pick this one out of all the Local H albums. And I really can't think of another way to interpret that. Hey Killer has really come up on its heels, but I don't know if I'm ready to say it overtakes it. It's definitely a more varied album than Hey Killer. The previous albums had a little bit of experimentation, piano, violin, meowing cats, but this one definitely took it to the next level. Not to mention the ongoing transition of grunge to rock. Overall, Whatever Happened to PJ Souls sounds closer to Pack Up the Cats, but even so, a few of the songs go full-on prog rock, along with epic arena rocking, both of which are on display with Buffalo Trace. It is an album with a lot of songs that sound totally different from one another. I wouldn't say none of them sound the same, but they are quite different. And they are awesome. It's also got a great dynamic range. You've got some hard songs, you got some soft songs, you've got songs that are a mixture, like Here Comes the Zoo, and a couple albums after. PJ Souls was not a concept album. Enough said, I'm not going to repeat myself. My picks for this album: California Songs, quintessential Local H. Despite the title, it's a big fuck you to California. with a parting shot to New York. This was the single off the album, and I have to say they chose that one right. It seems to have become one of their more popular songs because I've actually heard this on the radio several times. Granted, mostly between 2004 to 6, but I have heard it more recently than that. Taking that off the list, I would go with Everyone Alive, a song that you may have actually heard off the soundtrack of Burnout 3. Didn't stop me from making my own custom Local H soundtrack for the game though. I'd probably go with Heaven on the Way Down. So many songs I like. Dick Jones, Mellowed, That's What They All Say. Maybe even Buffalo Trace. PJ Souls is good too. Really the only weak point for me is How's the Weather Down There. It's a Scott Lucas song about a relationship. Haven't heard that one before. Hey Rita might also kind of have the same line, but I like that song considerably better. Money on the Dresser and Heavy Metal Bake Sale are both a lot of fun, if short. Scott Lucas himself considers it his favorite album. I don't know if that also means that he considers it the best, but I could certainly see an argument being made, but that argument will not be held here. Number 1, As Good as Dead, their second album from 1996. And god damn it, I wish I learned about this a lot sooner. I came really close, but I didn't. This still being early in their career, the album has a more refined sound that begins to move away from grunge towards rock, but it's still very much a grunge album. Like most of their other albums, it is a concept album, albeit one that's very loose, with the concept this time being around life in a dead-end town, like, say, Zion, or really, it was about being a teenager growing up in Zion. Which means it's another heaping helping of angst. And while I never really like to think about which album I liked better than the others, I feel pretty confident in declaring this their best work. Going just pound for pound, this is the best assortment of songs. It's almost like a greatest hits album. And to prove that point, I'm going to go straight to my picks. Bound for the Floor, Eddie Vedder, Fritz's Corner. Yeah, I bet you didn't see that one coming. All three of which were singles. I Will Brook, no complaints. I think they're perfectly chosen and the best songs off the album. Bound for the Floor was their biggest hit. You probably know it, even if only by copacetic. It's their only song that still gets any decent airplay. Eddie Vedder actually turned out to be kind of big too. I've heard it on the radio several times. I don't know if I've heard it more than California songs, but considering the album was already 10 years old by that point, it's more impressive. Sadly, Fritz's Corner didn't get anywhere near the mileage. I only heard that song on the radio once, way the hell back in 96 or 97. That was the first Local H song I ever heard, and even though I only heard it once, god damn it, that was all that it took. I was able to commit the lyrics to memory just from that one listen. It was the song that got me into Local H, even though I had no idea who they were at the time. And of course, this being the mid to late 90s, no one had their own internet, so I couldn't look it up. So I had to go for several years until I actually found out who they were, and managed to obtain a copy of the song. God, I love Fritz's Corner. It's my favorite Local H song. Like, it's uncomfortably close to being my theme song, but it wasn't that much longer that I heard Bound for the Floor. I don't know if I heard that song before, I have no recollection of it, but I remember hearing Bound for the Floor a few times, and the song didn't immediately grab me in the same way, but in true Local H fashion, it grew on me. I decided I needed to get my own copy of the song. But of course, I had to find out what the song even was. So I looked up the lyrics, found out what the song was, found out that it was made by the same band that made Fritz's Corner, and it was even from the same album. So I decided I needed to buy myself a copy of that album. But if we take those off the list, there's still one single left over. High-Fiving Motherfucker, or High-Fiving MF. I'm not sure if you're supposed to pronounce it like that. I don't know why they bothered making this into a single. High-Fiving Motherfucker makes up the chorus. So this song is censored to shit. Now, if I'm being completely honest, I'm not especially fond of the song. The lyrics are just a little too juvenile, even for me. But man, does it have some wicked drums and bass lines. It is a blast to listen to. And yeah, I could probably walk you through the whole track list. Manifest Density Part 1, that's just an intro. Lovey Dovey, a bitter anti-love song, but not actually about a relationship, just to get that out of the way. Then you got No Problem, which is the softest song on the album. It doesn't even have any drums until the very end. And perhaps not coincidentally, is my least favorite. But even so, I still like it, and I would even say it's one of their best truly soft songs. Then there's Freeze-Dried Lies. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce things that are in parentheses, but I pronounce them with a completely different tone of voice. It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. Baby wants to tame me. I forgot to do it during that one. Okay is another soft song, but a bit harder. And then it all ends with Manifest Density Part 2. It's really just an extended jamming outro. Alright, if I had to pick 3 other songs, I'm inclined to put Lovey Dovey on there. Probably nothing special. Definitely Freeze-Dried Lies. But I saw what you did and I Know Who You Are, and Back in the Day are both really fun, high-energy tracks. There isn't a single bad track on this album. In my eyes, this is the perfect Local H album. Not only do I think it has the best selection of songs, out of all their albums, I would say that As Good as Dead is the one that no other band but Local H could have made. As popular as Pack Up the Cats is, I feel that probably 50 other bands could have made it. Whatever Happened to PJ Souls and Hey Killer are also pretty unique, but maybe another band could have made them. As far as I'm concerned, they're never going to be able to top this. And this video is long enough, so thanks for coming out, bless you, and good night.